Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going all over the map with some really interesting news stories.
Yeah, we've got kind of an eclectic mix today.
First up, we'll learn the secrets to brewing, like the perfect glass of iced tea.
Ooh, I love iced tea.
Me too. And then we'll shift gears to a really heart-wrenching case in Texas.
Yeah, that one's really tough, but very important.
It is. And finally, we'll explore what might be the future of online connection with a look at decentralized social media.
A little something for everyone today.
I think so. So let's dive right in. Our first source is all about iced tea. This article is called Three Big Mistakes You're Making with Brewed Iced Tea.
Oh, I am definitely guilty of some of these.
Okay, so it might be fall, but iced tea is good all year round. So what's the first mistake we're all making?
Well, according to this article, it all starts with the water.
The water.
Yeah, this guy, Jordan G.L. Hardin, he's the director of food and beverage at Alfred. He says tea is 99% water.
Okay, so that makes sense.
So using good water is crucial for a good tasting iced tea.
So we should be using bottled water.
Well, not necessarily bottled water, but definitely filtered or spring water.
Oh, okay, I see.
So if your tap water tastes kind of funky,
Like chlorine-y.
yeah, exactly, or just has like a strong mineral taste that's going to come through in your tea.
Yuck. Nobody wants tap water flavored tea.
Exactly.
All right, so what's the next big iced tea mistake?
Being stingy with the tea itself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Hardin says steeping it longer doesn't actually make the tea stronger.
Oh, it just makes it more bitter.
Right, so if you want a bolder flavor, use more tea leaves, not more steeping time.
Got it. And I know he also recommends loose leaf over tea bags, right?
He does say that loose leaf tea is generally higher quality and will last longer.
And how much should you use?
About a teaspoon of loose leaf tea per cup of water.
Okay. But what about those of us who just love the convenience of tea bags?
Well, you can still make a good iced tea with tea bags.
Okay, good.
Just look for ones specifically designed for iced tea. They tend to be bigger and hold more tea.
Yeah.
And make sure your tea bags aren't expired. Stale tea won't taste as good.
Good tip. All right, what about this last mistake?
This one surprised me too. It turns out we might be using the wrong brewing method.
What do you mean?
Well, Hardin says there are two main methods: hot brewing and cold brewing.
So hot brewing is when you steep the tea in hot water and then chill it.
Yep. And cold brewing is steeping it in cold water, but for a much longer time.
Makes sense. But there's a catch with hot brewing, right?
There is. Hardin warns against hot brewing black tea and then immediately chilling it.
Why is that?
It can cause the tea to turn cloudy and bitter. It has to do with the temperature change and the compounds in black tea reacting with the minerals in hard water.
Interesting. So what's the solution for black tea lovers?
Your best bet is to cold brew black tea or let the hot tea cool down to room temperature before you put it in the fridge.
Good to know. Now, what about herbal and green teas?
For those, you can totally hot brew and then flash chill.
So what's flash chilling?
Basically, you're just rapidly cooling down the tea to stop the brewing process.
Right.
But for green tea, Hardin actually prefers to just cold brew it overnight.
Huh. I'd never thought about that. Wow, so there really is a lot of science behind making the perfect glass of iced tea.
Right. Who knew? But now for a story that's a lot less refreshing.
Yeah. Our next source takes us to Texas, and it's about a tragic case that raises some serious questions about health care in a post-Roe world.
This is the story of Jocelyn Barnica. She was 28 years old, and she died after doctors delayed treating her miscarriage.
This case is so disturbing because it really highlights the unintended consequences of those laws designed to restrict abortion.
Exactly. In Texas, it's illegal for doctors to end a pregnancy once a fetal heartbeat is detected.
Even in cases of miscarriage.
Unfortunately, yes.
And that's what makes this story so heartbreaking. Barnica wasn't seeking an abortion. She was having a miscarriage, and it was already in progress.
And her medical records actually show that her cervix was dilated, and the radiologist even noted that the miscarriage was in progress.
But because there was still a fetal heartbeat, the doctors hesitated to intervene.
It's awful. And because of the law in Texas, her situation wasn't considered a medical emergency, even though she was at a very high risk of infection.
Because of her open cervix.
Exactly. In a state that didn't have an abortion ban, she could have received standard medical care to speed up labor or to empty her uterus.
Oh, wow. So what happened?
Well, Barnica's aunt said that she was begging for help, and she was really frustrated that the doctors weren't doing anything except repeatedly doing ultrasounds to check for that fetal heartbeat.
That's just awful.
It is. And tragically, it was that delay in getting treatment that likely led to her death.
From sepsis.
Yeah. A lot of medical experts reviewed her case, and they all agreed that the delay in treatment went against standard medical practice.
It's so sad. It reminds me of the Savita Halappanavar case in Ireland, where a woman died from sepsis because she was denied an abortion when she was miscarrying.
It's another tragic example of how these laws can put women's lives in danger even if they're not seeking abortions.
So have things changed in Texas since Barnica's death?
Well, lawmakers have added an exception for ectopic pregnancies.
But that doesn't cover cases like Barnica's.
No, it doesn't, and it also doesn't protect doctors from being prosecuted.
So they're still afraid to provide care.
Right, and that fear is having a very real impact on healthcare.
It's a really complex and difficult issue with no easy answers.
Mm-hmm.
It really forces us to think about the ethical and medical dilemmas that these laws create and how they're impacting women's lives.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a lot to think about.
Okay, so let's move on now to the upcoming U.S. election and how it might impact the cryptocurrency market. This next source dives into how institutional investors are getting ready for some potential market volatility, particularly with Bitcoin.
It's really interesting. There's been a huge surge in call options within the CME Bitcoin futures market, which suggests that investors think the price of Bitcoin is going to rally after the election.
So what are call options?
Well, basically, it's like placing a bet that the price of an asset is going to go up. And Joshua Lim, who's the co-founder of a crypto broker called Arbellis Markets, says there's a ton of November call options for Bitcoin with a break-even price of nearly $80,000.
Whoa. Okay, so what does break-even price mean?
That's basically the price that Bitcoin would have to hit for those investors to start making a profit.
Okay, so these call options are basically a bet that the price of Bitcoin will be over $80,000 in November.
Yeah, exactly. They're very bullish on Bitcoin.
Wow. Okay, and I also read that short-term borrowing rates on institutional crypto lending markets are going up.
Right, and this is interesting because it suggests that those big institutions are also anticipating a lot of volatility, and they might be preparing for a bull market by borrowing funds to buy Bitcoin.
So they're basically taking out loans to buy Bitcoin.
Essentially, yeah.
Wow. It definitely sounds like institutional investors are getting more and more involved in the crypto market.
Yeah, they're not shying away from it anymore.
Okay, so let's switch gears again and talk about social media. We all know that Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, which is now called X, has been pretty chaotic, to say the least.
Yeah, there's been a lot of drama.
A lot of drama. And a lot of users are looking for alternatives,
Yeah.
especially decentralized ones.
Yeah, one of those is Bluesky, which is what our next source is about.
Okay, so full disclosure, the person who wrote this article is on the board at Bluesky, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, they're definitely a little biased.
Yeah, but it's still a really interesting perspective on what it might take for decentralized social media to really take off.
Yeah, the author's main point is that decentralized social media can't just be an escape from Twitter or other centralized platforms.
They'd have to offer something more.
Yeah, something totally unique that wasn't possible before. They call it the killer app.
Okay, so what does the author think this killer app for Bluesky might be?
They talk about a few features. Domains as handles, decentralized IDs, composable moderation, and algorithmic choice.
Whoa, that's a lot of jargon.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries, break it down for us. What are domains as handles?
So it basically means your username would be connected to a domain that you control.
Oh, so it'd be like having your own website address as your username.
Right, and that would give you a lot more control over your identity online.
Oh, I get it. And you wouldn't have to worry about someone else taking your username or the platform suddenly shutting down and taking your account with it.
Exactly. It's like true ownership.
I like that. Okay, so what are decentralized IDs?
That means you can verify your identity across different platforms without needing some central authority to do it for you. So it's kind of like having a digital passport that you control.
I see. All right, so what about composable moderation?
This is really interesting. It means you get to decide how to moderate your own feed instead of being at the mercy of whatever rules the platform sets.
Oh, so you're in control of the content that you see.
Yep.
And algorithmic choice.
That would give you control over the algorithms that decide what you see in your feed.
Oh, so you could prioritize certain types of content or sources over others.
Exactly. You'd be in the driver's seat.
It sounds like the common thread with all of these features is really giving users more control over their experience.
Absolutely. It's about empowering the individual.
So what about other decentralized social media platforms?
Well, the article mentions Mastodon, Nostr, and Farcaster, and how they're also contributing to this whole movement.
They all sound kind of similar to me. What are the differences?
They each have their own unique approach to decentralization. Mastodon focuses on creating independent communities.
So it's not just one big platform. It's like a network of smaller interconnected ones.
Exactly. Then there's Nostr, which is much more minimalist. It's basically a protocol for sending and receiving messages without needing a central server.
Hmm. That sounds kind of complicated.
It's actually quite simple. It's like email where anyone can set up their own server.
Ah, okay. So more control and less censorship.
Exactly. And then there's Farcaster, which is trying to create a decentralized social network that's really user-friendly.
Okay. So what makes Farcaster special?
It's built on a blockchain, which is a really secure and transparent way to store data.
And I bet that makes it harder for one entity to control everything.
Yeah, it does. Plus, they're experimenting with some cool features that could really change the game.
Oh, like what?
Things like frames, which are like mini apps that run within the Farcaster network.
So you could have apps inside your social feed.
It's something like that. It's a really interesting concept.
So it seems like all these platforms are really trying to find that perfect balance between user experience, functionality, and control.
It's a really exciting space to watch because you never know what innovative features are going to pop up next.
It reminds me of what we were just talking about with Ice-T and how there's a lot of experimentation and innovation happening there too.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that things are always changing and evolving, and we don't have to settle for the status quo.
Okay, so our last source for this part of the deep dive brings us back to powerful individuals and how they shape information and access.
This one is about billionaire ownership of media, and specifically Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post.
Ah, yes, the Amazon guy.
Yeah, the article was written by Jason Kobler, who's a journalist and the co-founder of 404 Media. And he has a really personal connection to the Post because his father worked there for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he's seen firsthand how the newspaper industry has changed over the years.
And he's not too happy about it, is he?
Well, he contrasts his father's dedication to the Post with Bezos's recent actions.
Like what kind of actions?
Well, there was that whole controversy over Bezos's decision to kill the Post's endorsement of Kamala Harris, and then he wrote this op-ed defending his decision.
Oh, right, I remember that.
Yeah, and a lot of people were upset about it, and subscriptions dropped significantly.
So is Kobler saying that Bezos is interfering with the Post's editorial decisions?
Well, Bezos insists that he doesn't interfere, but Kobler argues that his wealth and his actions at Amazon tell a different story.
Okay, so what does he mean by that?
Well, he points out that Bezos is so rich that the financial losses of the Post mean nothing to him.
It's just a drop in the bucket.
Exactly. And so the paper's survival is essentially at his whim, which raises a lot of concerns about editorial freedom.
Because if he doesn't like what they're publishing, he could just shut it down.
Right. And Kobler draws a parallel to other examples of billionaires who own media companies and how that can impact journalists and the quality of the news.
Yeah, it's a really important point. But didn't Bezos say in his op-ed that he never pressured anyone at the Post to do anything that benefited him?
Yeah, he actually said, "I challenge you to find one instance in those 11 years where I have prevailed upon anyone at the Post in favor of my own interests."
Wow, okay.
But Kobler's point is that Bezos's actions speak louder than words.
Yeah, like what he's done at Amazon doesn't exactly scream ethical and fair.
Yeah, he has a history of mistreating employees and running a really ruthless workplace.
And Kobler also talks about his own experience at VCE, right?
He talks about how he poured his heart and soul into his work there, but then the company made decisions that felt like a total betrayal.
So he knows what it's like to feel disillusioned with the media industry.
And he sees a lot of parallels between his experience at VCE and what's happening at the Post under Bezos.
And his big takeaway is that billionaires are not the saviors of journalism. They're actually the biggest threat.
It's a pretty bold statement.
It is. It really challenges us to think about what the future of journalism looks like in an age of billionaires.
Absolutely. So what do you think about all of this?
Well, this is only part one of our deep dive, so stay tuned for part two, where we'll dig even deeper into these stories and see how they all connect.
Yeah, this has been a whirlwind of a ride so far. We've covered a lot of ground.
But one thing that seems to tie all these stories together is this theme of power dynamics.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it pops up everywhere, from the way we brew iced tea, to the complexities of healthcare, to the future of social media and the impact of billionaires on our news.
It's all about who has the power and how they use it.
And whether those who are impacted have any agency or control.
So stay tuned for part two, where we'll explore these themes even further.
Yeah, we've got a lot more to uncover. And we're back for part two of our deep dive into today's news. It's amazing how these stories we've been talking about all seem to connect in some way.
I know it's really interesting how everything from a simple glass of iced tea to the crazy world of decentralized social media ties back to these bigger themes.
Totally. And speaking of choices, our next source really makes you think about the choices we make as consumers.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, we were just talking about billionaire ownership of the media, and this article brings up a really thought-provoking point about disengaging from companies when you just don't feel valued or respected as a customer or even as an employee.
Hmm, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So the author Jason Kobler draws this parallel between his own personal experience working at VCE, where he was like super dedicated to his job.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Right. You put your heart and soul into something, and then the company makes decisions that totally go against everything you believe in.
Ugh, it's like the ultimate betrayal.
Right. And he compares this to his dad's 30-year career at the Washington Post.
Wow, 30 years. That's a long time.
Right. And in both cases, it's this feeling of disillusionment, like you're just a cog in a machine.
Especially when that machine is controlled by someone with a ton of money and power.
Exactly. And it's like a wake-up call
To what?
to the fact that our choices as consumers really do matter. When we subscribe to a newspaper or buy a product from a certain company, we're basically endorsing their values and their practices.
So we're complicit.
In a way, yes. And if those values and practices don't align with our own, we should maybe think twice about continuing to support them.
So boycott.
It's not always that simple, but yeah, sometimes that's the best way to make your voice heard.
It's definitely something to consider,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to things like news media.
Right. I mean, we all need access to reliable information, but it's getting harder and harder to know who to trust.
Especially with these billionaires buying up all the media outlets.
And Kobler's point is that maybe relying on these billionaires to save journalism is a bad idea in the first place.
So what's the alternative?
Well, he talks about the rise of independent journalism and how crowdfunding and reader-supported platforms might be a more sustainable and ethical way to fund news.
It makes sense the more power is concentrated in the hands of a few, the less accountable those people are to the rest of us.
Right. And it's not just about journalism either. We see this same dynamic at play in healthcare and social media.
That's so true. It's like everyone's starting to realize that these centralized systems aren't working for them anymore.
Yep. And they're looking for more decentralized, more community-driven alternatives. It's actually really similar to what's happening with decentralized social media.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's about taking back control.
Exactly. It's about putting power back in the hands of the people.
Speaking of decentralized social media, can we circle back to that for a minute?
Yeah.
I'm still kind of confused about all the different platforms out there.
Sure. What are you confused about?
Well, we talked about Bluesky and those potential killer app features. But what about those other platforms like Mastodon and Nostr and Farcaster? What are the big differences between them?
Okay, so Mastodon has been around for a while, and it's all about creating these independent communities called instances.
So like a bunch of little social networks that can all talk to each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like having a network of interconnected towns rather than one giant mega city.
I kind of like that idea. More intimate and maybe less chaotic.
Yeah, and it gives people more control over their own online experience.
Okay, so what about Nostr?
Nostr is super simple, and that's what makes it so cool.
Simple is good.
Right, it's basically a protocol for sending and receiving messages without a central server.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's kind of like email, where anyone can set up their own server and communicate with others no matter who their provider is.
So, less censorship and more freedom. I like it. What about Farcaster?
Farcaster is interesting because it's trying to build a decentralized social network that has all the bells and whistles of a centralized platform like Twitter, but without all the downsides.
Okay, so user-friendly but decentralized.
Exactly, and they're using blockchain technology to make it all happen.
Okay, so it's super secure and transparent.
You got it. And they're also playing around with some really innovative features like frames, which are kind of like mini apps that run within the Farcaster network.
Wait, so you could have apps inside your social media feed?
It's something like that. It's still in the early stages, but it has a lot of potential.
It's kind of mind-blowing how fast all of this is developing.
I know, right? And it's exciting to see how each platform is approaching this challenge of decentralization in a different way.
It's like a race to see who can build the best decentralized social media platform.
And it's a race that could have huge implications for how we communicate and connect with each other in the future.
No pressure.
Huh, right. But it's a good reminder that we have options. We don't have to settle for the status quo.
And that brings us back to this theme of power dynamics that keeps popping up.
Yeah, it's everywhere. In healthcare, in media, in social media, in pretty much every aspect of our lives.
It's about recognizing where power lies
Yeah.
and whether it's being used responsibly,
And about challenging those power structures when necessary.
and exploring alternatives.
Right. Because there are always alternatives.
And we'll continue to explore those alternatives in part 3 of our deep dive.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the show. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the perfect iced tea to the complexities of healthcare, social media, and even billionaire influence on the media.
It's been quite a journey. And you know what's interesting?
What's that?
It seems like a lot of these stories share a common theme. Disillusionment.
Disillusionment, huh?
Yeah. Disillusionment with centralized platforms, disillusionment with traditional power structures, even disillusionment with a poorly brewed glass of iced tea.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I see what you mean.
It's like people are starting to wake up and realize that the systems that are supposed to be working for them aren't really doing that.
Yeah, they're realizing that things could be better and that they don't have to just accept the status quo.
Exactly. They're demanding more transparency, more accountability, and more control over their own lives.
And we see this happening in so many different areas, like in healthcare, with all the concerns about restrictive laws and corporate influence.
Right. And in the media, where there's this growing distrust of news organizations, especially those owned by billionaires.
And of course, in social media, where users are fed up with censorship and algorithms that control what they see.
It's like everyone's looking for alternatives, ways to break free from these systems that just aren't working anymore.
Yeah, and it's not just about tearing down the old systems. It's about building new ones that are more equitable, more sustainable, and more aligned with people's values.
Right. It's like realizing you've been brewing iced tea wrong your whole life. You don't just give up on iced tea altogether. You experiment, you try new methods, you find a way to make it better.
I like that analogy. So it's about applying that same spirit of innovation and experimentation to these bigger systems that impact our lives.
Exactly. We can learn from the past, we can challenge the status quo, and we can create something better.
And we see that happening already with the rise of decentralized social media.
Right. It's a direct response to the limitations and concerns people have with centralized platforms.
And it's not just a tech thing, it's a cultural shift, a movement towards more distributed and community-driven models.
And we see this in other areas too, like the push for more patient-centered healthcare or the rise of independent journalism.
It's like a ripple effect, a growing awareness that we have the power to shape our own futures.
Exactly. And that even small choices can make a big difference.
Like how we brew our iced tea or where we get our news.
Right. So to our listeners out there, I encourage you to stay curious, to question everything, and to think critically about the systems that shape your life.
Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, to explore alternatives, and to use your voice to advocate for a better world.
And remember that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and a lot of trial and error.
But it's worth it.
Absolutely. Because, as we've seen today, even a simple glass of iced tea can spark a conversation about power dynamics and the future of our world.
So keep those conversations going, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep brewing that perfect glass of iced tea.
And that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.